Hi, everyone. I'm Stan Mallow. Welcome to Paranormal Yacker. My guest in today's show is author George Mitrovic. He'll be yakking with me from his home in Australia about his book, Amazing Encounters with UFOs in Canada. George Mitrovic, welcome to Paranormal Yacker.
Hello, Stan. It's a pleasure and an honor to be on. You've got a good reputation, so I agree.
To say you are a prolific writer would be an understatement. What with you having authored some 80 books on everything from strange humanoids, UFOs, and other anomalous phenomena. Do you recall, George, when you first became interested in the world of the paranormal, and did anything you see or read trigger that interest?
When I was 4, I wrote an opera for the piano based on the sinking of the flooding of the Aswan Dam, so I knew I was a little different, because to me it was terrifying. Then I read Bender's book on the Philadelphia experiment when I was 7, and that sort of continued on to finally reading a copy, I think, of the Malleus Maleficarum when I was 8. So I was a little stranger than normal children.
In Amazing Encounters with UFOs of Canada, you write about UFO encounters that occurred in every province. What I would like to do now, George, is ask you about some of those amazing encounters. Here goes. In July of 1897, at 1 a.m. in the morning, Ocanagan Landing in British Columbia, a Mr. and Mrs. Nichols, who were employed at a mine there, saw a balloon of large dimensions and oblong shape that had approached them. How did they describe what they saw?
They saw this strange machine or bright light in the sky that was spitting out sparks and making noises as if electrical appliances were being worked, which is a bit interesting because there was no flying machine in the world, apparently, that had the capability to produce light. In this period, batteries weren't even invented. Well, actually, they were. They were about a ton in weight. You couldn't put it on a balloon. And the great searchlight beams of the 1896-1897 airship flap over North America, well, that shouldn't have occurred, but it did. This is one of the rare Canadian events. I wrote the book on Canada. I always like to do a book on Canada because people forget to write books on Canada. And to me, it's important. I've got good friends in Canada. And if I'm writing books on the rest of the world, well, I write Canada, whether it's UFOs, hairy hominoids, or whatever. But the great 1897 flap, I've written hundreds of pages on. I've also, around the same time, on August 13, another unidentified airship was seen flying over Vancouver, as well as Sudbury, Ontario, on the other side of Okanagan Landing in British Columbia. The speeds of a lot of these craft were so fast, there were no aerial craft at the time, so I can't even say no apparent aerial craft at the time could do it. There weren't any.
In Manitoba, a 6-year-old girl was collecting eggs on her grandfather's farm when she found herself bleeding from a gash on her leg, though there was no tear in her genes. Under hypnotic regression in 1979, she recalled that incident. It was the result of her being abducted by beings from another world. Could you expand on that abduction?
This is only a 6-year-old girl, and it's amazing the number of children involved in contactee cases. Maybe their mind is more innocent and open to things, but that could open up a whole new plethora of events that maybe we'll leave out for the moment. She found herself lying on a couch in a place with a grey light, and unseen beings telling her that the cut would not hurt, that they came from some place far, far away, but needed a bit of her for understanding. What the hell were they trying to understand? These beings, it couldn't be seen, but she could hear, said there were many inhabited worlds and theirs was nice. They might take her there one day. This started the beginning of a series of abduction narratives, all recorded under hypnosis. Each of these items, these abductions, how many of them are dream state? How many of them are interdimensional state? How many of them are an arrival to Earth, next second, orthon from Venus or anyone else, Greys, whatever, is busy dissecting bits of you, talking to you, sometimes doing not the greatest things with you, other times giving you prophecies of the end of times, which in retrospect, a lot of them never occurred. What is actually happening in this vast dream state or altered reality of ufology?
In September 1978, a family in New Brunswick saw a shiny disc-shaped object hovering over their farmhouse farmhouse. Years later, the daughter of the farmers was told by her mother she had seen the disc land and saw figures coming out of it. One of those figures was noticed walking behind her. It had strange features. What were they?
The creature was 4 foot tall and greyish green in colour, but had no visible eyes, ears, mouth, or nose. That's not unusual, but it is rare. But the height and the grey-green colour is relatively common. A lot of greys are greyish green in colour. Funnily enough, it also had a sort of bag which it threw over the witness, and then she can't remember anything. So we're not quite sure what happened after that. But hopefully more hypnosis will bring it up, unless she's shielded herself so well.
In October of 1887, the captain and crew of the SS Siberian saw a huge ball of fire rising up out of the sea off of Cape Race in Ferryland County in Newfoundland. It stopped close to the ship and then roared away into the sky where it vanished. What else did the captain report seeing when this phenomena occurred?
He stated that he'd seen similar phenomena before, and normally people would say it's just a meteorite and they've forgotten which way they're meant to go. We know they only go down, but here they've been seen rising up before. But there's no volcanic activity in this area. It's very dormant and very dead. Some people say it was a big fairy light. There must be some bloody big fairies around if it's an enormous fairy light. He described it as a huge ball of fire rising up out of the sea. But this is 1887. This is before a lot of UFO sightings. So it's probably the only explanation for a ball of light coming up out of the sea, or what we would call a USO, an unidentified submarine object that decides to become airborne. And these aren't rare either. One thing I found with all of my research, and I've written tens of thousands of pages on all of these subjects, is a lot of them are quite common. The unique becomes commonplace, and that's the real interesting mystery about it all.
In 1958, in the Northwest Territories of Canada, Special Constable Alex Stevenson and his wife were returning home by snowmobile when they saw the light of what they thought was another snowmobile approaching. It wasn't. In fact, what they saw terrified Mrs. Stevenson. What did they see that so terrified her?
Initially, they thought it might be a light from a light aircraft, but when they got closer to it, it became so blinding that they had to stop. The light also stopped, and it hovered 15 meters ahead and above them. And as you said, Mrs. Stevenson was so terrified, she fled from the snowmobile and had to be brought back by her husband. The light was so intense they could only make fleeting glances at it and were not able to see any structure. After a few minutes, fortunately for them, it moved away back into the sky. This is 1958. Okay, this is after 1947, the apparent beginning of the flying saucer period. But it's also the reason why we had earlier sightings. These things have been around a lot longer than 1947 with the Arnold sighting in the Cascades. And a lot of them have the same description. A strange light that comes down, hovers over you, almost blinds you when there is no reason for it to be there. And if it's a meteor, why would it stop? You know it was a meteor.
In Shag Harbor in Shelburne County, Nova Scotia, on October 3rd, 1968, a 60-foot-long UFO was seen to descend from the sky. It glided into the harbor and then submerged into the ocean half a mile offshore. Could you describe what that UFO looked like and what it was seen doing before descending in a patch of yellow foam?
It was initially seen as a bright reddish-orange light in the sky, like a pinpoint source in the sky, in a row, blinking one at a time. They were at an angle of 45 degrees dipping to the right, and it soon hit the sea surface where it created sizzling and bubbling, as if something exceptionally hot is hitting the sea surface. The area of foam it created was 80 feet wide, but no traces of anything were found. Interestingly enough, a similar sighting had occurred in Halifax 17 days earlier, in Halifax in Nova Scotia, when 4 boys saw a black circular object dive out of the sky and vanish into the waters of the Cornwallis River after being seen hovering for a while. And for 10 minutes it oscillated like a spinning top in the water. It was estimated to be 15 feet across and 6 feet high, made no noise, and the water did not splash when it submerged. We had to assume it submerged very slowly, or did it affect matter around it? Like, we never hear of them breaking sound barriers when they're going at speeds faster than light. Is it because they've changed the reality around themselves so there's no friction? If there's no friction, there's no sound, there's no reaction, there's no opposite movement. We can forget Newtonian physics. There is no opposite reaction to the initial. But it's just interesting that only 17 days apart, we have water-seeking aerial objects that we assume to be machines ploughing into the water.
In May 1850, in the Wellington Channel, in the Queen Elizabeth Islands, in Nunavut, in the northernmost part of Canada, a large periodical mass was seen floating in the air. Eventually, a second one was seen. They were neither balloons or kites. What else can you tell me about those objects?
These spheroidal or spherical masses appeared near each other and they undulated with the wind. So they did have mass. But as you said, they weren't balloons or kites. And they were north of the Advance, which was travelling with the Resolute as part of a Henry Grinnell expedition looking for the remains of a Sir John Franklin expedition of 1845. The principal object appeared to be 2 feet long by 18 inches broad. What reference do we have of that size when we've got nothing to compare it to in the sky? What size were they actually? And if this was imagination, as some people believe, all these sightings of UFOs are, why do we imagine the same things? Why do we imagine green dragons with pink wings, good old-fashioned medieval fantasies? But no, it's a round thing or a disc thing. It's in the sky. It comes down, it heads up. After having a meeting or a not meeting, I just scaring the crap out of us. To these observers, these are all professional people. They were on a rescue mission. They were looking for the lost Sir John Franklin expedition. They weren't dummies, but they were still mysteries to them, especially in an area where there were no people. Nobody's going to be flying kites at Nunavut, especially in the Wellington Channel. It's the beginning of summer, but it's still bloody cold.
At Port Burwell in Elgin County in Ontario, in the summer of 1925, a woman was abducted by alien beings, brought onto their spacecraft, and examined by them with various instruments before eventually being released. How did she describe those extraterrestrials who abducted her, and what did they do to her?
The beings were slender with whitish grey skin, large heads and bulging eyes, and they appeared to be wearing tight-fitting satin-like outfits. They either appear naked or appear covered in a film of plastic or a film of satin. And this is 1925, so not many plastics around, probably not in Ontario at that time. Her analogy of satin is perfect for a body-hugging material. She did have an interesting time with them.
Did she describe what they were doing with her, what she was doing with them, or?
Well, she describes it as examining her with various instruments, but I think with the coyness of that period, 1925 again, we didn't get any more detail. Quite often there are examinations of genitalia and things in these reports, exceptionally common reports. Some of them are written, some you take a bit of probing to get out. The woman's still in shock. What she saw was a large train-like craft approaching in the sky. 1925, that's pretty amazing. It was emitting a loud whining sound and it approached her. Then she recalls floating up into, this isn't normal daydreaming for this period for anyone. There's not even fiction in this period with this sort of thing in it. Once again, we have to look at the actual event or the actual apparent event.
In Summerside on Prince Edward Island on September 21st, 1966, 8 members of the Royal Canadian Air Force were refueling an aircraft when they saw a shiny circular object traveling at high speed. What were their observations of that object?
Well, first they saw this shiny circular object traveling in an easterly direction at high speed. So we have direction, we have a shiny metal object. It suddenly stopped and descended close to the ground. Normal aircraft don't suddenly stop and descend unless they're actually crashing. It's too hard to suddenly descend with an aircraft. Then it hovered close to the ground for 20 minutes, which is totally beyond technology of 1966. And I must admit, finding reports from Prince Edward Island wasn't easy. There aren't many people there, nor many reports, so finding them was interesting. Incidentally, though, at Burton, 70 k's away, 2 fishermen saw what they thought was a very bright star travelling very high from west to east at the same time. So we have independent groups of witnesses, which is what you want. It's not just one person and, okay, they're having a moment of imagination or mania or visions or something, but their medication's not working. We can't use those excuses. We've got 8 trained Royal Canadian Air Force personnel refueling an aircraft. They're not stupid. They are highly qualified. They are highly educated, and they're trained as observers, because in the air, they have to observe everything. Fishermen, we don't know how well they're trained as observers, but they still noticed a very strange star was seen traveling west to east in the sky. These independently witnessed sightings are the things that give us meat to these reports.
In the winter of 1940, near Lake Abitibi in Quebec, 2 people who had gone snow skating in an isolated field near the lake observed a bizarre and terrifying incident. It involved a large wolf and small humanoids with yellowish faces and wearing dark green garb. Could you elaborate on what those snow skaters witnessed?
I'm going to read the actual report here because it's got too much detail for me to remember. So bear with me. This is an unusual report and a terrifying report. I'd hate to be out in the snow anywhere and this suddenly occurs. They were observing this white wolf leaving the woods. It was walking very slowly and looking back in the direction of some trees. It stopped about 35 meters from the witnesses, totally uninterested in. Suddenly, out of the group of trees, 6 small men emerged. They're only about 2.5 foot tall, all similar in appearance with yellowish faces and wearing dark green garb. The wolf stood as if paralyzed, looking intently at the small figures. The small men apparently did not see the witnesses. They stared at the wolf and pointed their fingers at it. They spoke very quickly between themselves in a rapid-fire, unintelligible language. One of the beings advanced to within a few feet from the large wolf. The being then raised his hand and pronounced a few words at the wolf. Suddenly, the wolf threw himself on the being, quickly tearing it apart and scattering its remains on the snow. Then a strange vapor or mist was seen rising from the dead being, and the other 5 little men stumbled back and stared at the wolf. I'd stare too. One of the witnesses suddenly grabbed a dead tree branch and threw it at the wolf, and that scattered the beings that disappeared into the woods. No, the wolf scattered, howling at the same time. It does get confusing in this sighting. One of the small men then produced a small plastic-looking bag and approached for remains of a dead humanoid. He collected the scattered bits and pieces and placed them in the bag. At this point, one of the 2 witnesses is unable to control herself and vomits, as one would. The 5 small men then walked away into the woods, and the 2 witnesses put on their ski boots and followed them. They were easy to follow since they left small tracks in the snow. The tracks led to a large hollow on the ground, free from snow, and the track stopped there. While looking around the area where the small humanoid was killed by the wolf, one of the witnesses found a piece of small gelatinous rubber-like substance, also green in colour. They attempted to cut it in 2 with an axe, but were unable to. The whereabouts of this piece of evidence is not known. That's the problem with a lot of evidence from UFO and other paranormal reports. Does it only exist for the period of the sighting of the event and then disappear again? Or is it confiscated by the particular government of the day? That's a common theory. Probably does exist. It seems as if these events occur in a time and place for a period, and they are real. Real as my hands hitting each other. And then like fairy dust, it's gone again. In and out of dimensions, in and out of realities. Are we colliding with other dimensions of reality? Not necessarily interstellar space, because who wants to spend 4.6 years at light speed traveling just to Alpha Centauri? That's a conventional science, a space travel. But you can just go through a quasar vacuum and into the multiverse via wormholes. But that's another lot of stories.
A UFO crashed in a remote, unpopulated area of Saskatchewan in March of 1960. It was seized by the Canadian military. The U.S. government wanted the disc, and negotiations were conducted between the 2 countries. At the crash site, 2 human-looking aliens were found lying outside the craft. They were dead. Eventually, the disc and bodies were transported to a nearby base in North Dakota and then to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Upon investigation, a 3rd occupant was found and still alive. Torturous medical examinations were performed on him. What else can you tell me about this incredible chapter in the history of UFOs?
This is one of quite a few UFO crash reports. This one's 1960. We had a few in 1947 and other times around the world. This poor little bugger was 5 foot 7 inches tall. He's pinned beneath one section of a compartment, but apparently still alive. He weighed 190 pounds, and his body seemed somehow heavier or denser than humans. His skin was bronze, reminiscent of Mediterranean or South American cultures, and his hair was similarly brown and very short in a Roman or crew cut style. The real difference in appearance from Earth humans was his ears were slightly pointed, like a pixie. The man was taken to an operating room, and in spite of the fact that the anesthesia had no effect on him, the doctors, under the direction of Dr. Frank Drake, PhD, who's quite renowned, who referred to the recovery as Project Ozma, OZMA, performed torturous medical examinations on him using his head. The alien man, who the project personnel nicknamed Hank, died some months after. They obviously couldn't feed him or anything. and he just died. He was a different creature. But how much credence do we give to these reports when there are so many of them? It even states further on that the origin of the disk was established to have been from the Tau Ceti system, which is 11.8 light years from the sun, and Hank was debriefed. So how was communication established? Hank, the alien, confirmed he originated from the Tau Ceti system, and also that his people cooperate with the Epsilon Eridani civilization. That's another constellation. He said that they did not like the situation created with the small grey aliens, which we have reasonable knowledge of and knowledge of sightings of. The Tau Cetians thought that the abductions being carried out by some of the greys from Zeta Reticuli are great injustice to humanity. They stated that they are a parasitic race that has and is preying on human civilizations through the universe. The aliens said they were here supposedly to help. Apparently, the greys had preyed on the Tau Cetians a long time ago, and their craft was actually shot down by negative aliens. Somebody asked if they were reticulians or crashed because of technical failure. That detail is not clear. What I always say with these reports is I record them. You do what you want to do with them, but there are themes even to these sightings of craft being shot out of the sky or crashing out of the sky. Sometimes it's just little things. Massachusetts, 1964 sometime, a UFO went through a billboard. To me, that's a learner driver. It just wasn't quite sure what it was doing and then went back up into the sky, so it wasn't a meteor. Other times, they leave massive craters or explosion sites, or they disappear into the sea, like the ones we discussed earlier. The only way you find what happens is you start looking at the total number of events and start realizing there are themes in them that nobody realizes are themes, that nobody could corroborate to create, that nobody could wander around discussing. That's why with a lot of my reports and my books, I go back to 1650 when there's no communication between people. Then you've still got the same themes. You've still got the same descriptions. That's what makes it interesting.
While dying of cancer, a man who lived near Yellowknife in Yukon Territory in 1950 gave a taped testimony of something that happened to him 20 years previous. It involved human-like green-tinged beings who came to his home and stayed there for 3 or 4 days. Could you expand on what these beings looked like and what they did?
They were very similar to humans, but had different jawbones, pockmarked skin and ears. They wore normal clothing. Incredibly, it was I just tripped over my tongue. 56 degrees below zero outside, and the strangers were wearing suits that appeared to have been made out from car upholstery, a jacket, and soundless zippered pants, and boots with some type of metallic device attached to them, not the sort of clothes you'd wear in that weather. And they exuded an odour resembling a burnt-out motor, which is also a common theme in many events. They brought in boxes full of equipment, which they said they needed to calibrate, and then wore magnifying devices on their heads, which they pulled over their eyes while working on the equipment. One who appeared to wear contact lenses, and all had dentures or perfect teeth. But what were they doing out at Yellowknife in winter when no one would be outside for love or money, wandering around in clothes that basically are totally unsuitable for the occasion? And this is a common theme as well with some of our humanoids from apparently elsewhere or space, dressed the wrong way, the wrong time, driving vehicles that don't seem to be the most recent ones, yet a totally imperfect showroom condition.
Should viewers of Paranormal Yacker want to buy your book, Amazing Encounters with UFOs of Canada, or learn about other books you have written and how they can purchase them, how do they go about doing that?
Oh, that's very easy. You just go straight to Amazon. Nothing to it. You've got almost all of my books, apart from a couple of early ones, they're all ebooks. So you can read it on your train. Don't read it in your car while you're driving. I haven't done a reading one yet. I don't want to send people to sleep while they're driving. The majority now are also in paperback. It's very easy to read. I don't write for intellectuals. I don't write for great theosophical debate. I write because I'm interested in these events and what the themes are. I'm interested in the knowledge of these events being released worldwide. That's why I write books that cover the entire world, because people need to know these things. These events and what happened in them are far more important than people give credit to. As we've seen just from this little selection, they're not just individual hallucinations. They leave physical traces. They leave psychological traces. They interact with the sea. They interact with the ground. So they have a physical mass. And only by collating data and collecting data can you find the themes that run under them.
George Mitrovic, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yacker. I wish you success with Amazing Encounters with UFOs of Canada and look forward to interviewing you in the future about other books you have written, all of which are a perfect fit for the Paranormal Yacker Show.
I've got a really good one on hairy humanoids in Canada. You'll love it.
Great. We shall be speaking on this for sure. Thank you. You've been a great guest. I thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. To be sure you don't miss any interviews on my free YouTube channel, all you have to do is press the subscribe button on your screen.